This is the series Squid Game, the work that captivated millions and became one of the most successful series worldwide. It's hard to find someone who hasn't watched it. The idea of the series is simple: innocent children's games, but with deadly consequences. The winner gets immense wealth, while the loser loses their life. The idea of the series is very exciting, and it's natural for it to achieve such great success. But recently, there's been a lot of talk about the series, and some have started to wonder, is it possible that its events are inspired by a true story? Could this madness and brutality we saw on screen have actually happened in reality? For those who haven't watched the series, the events include incredibly shocking and violent situations. So, when I first heard this rumor, my reaction was, impossible. This is definitely an exaggeration. It's hard to imagine societies with such cruelty, especially in the modern age. But when I started researching the story we're going to talk about today, I discovered that I was completely wrong. The reality supposedly behind Squid Game is much worse than what we saw on screen. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Use the bell symbol, like, and follow me on social media. And now, let's talk about the brothers' home case. There was a boy named Kim Young-shin from South Korea. In the early 1980s, he was 15 years old and lived in the city of Busan. His home life was full of tension and problems. His father was an addict, and arguments between him and his mother happened constantly. And one day, things escalated unprecedentedly. Kim was sitting in his room, trying to ignore the loud noises, but he felt intense pressure on his chest. His heart was pounding fast, and his eyes were full of tears. Suddenly, he heard the sound of something big breaking in the living room. He couldn't take it anymore. He felt that the amount of tension at home was unbearable. So he decided to escape. He gathered some of his simple belongings, carried his small bag, put on his shoes, and left. He had no idea what he would do, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't come back. He knew he would be on the streets, homeless. It's true that he had never lived as a homeless person before, but he was used to spending a long time outside the house, where he used to help his mother sell gum or sweets in the streets. Nevertheless, his first days on the street were much harder than he expected. He would sleep in deserted corners, eat leftover food he found, and rely on the kindness of people to survive. And despite the hunger, exhaustion, and fear, he felt a freedom he had never felt before. Life away from domestic violence was easier, even with the harshness of the streets. He lived on the hope that one day his situation would improve. One day, he was leaning against a cracked wall, eating a piece of bread he had gotten from a passerby. Suddenly, he noticed a shadow approaching him. He slowly raised his head to see a police officer staring at him with a harsh look, as if he were facing a dangerous criminal, not just a 15-year-old boy. This police officer, like many others, was tasked with a mission they called cleaning the city. Simply put, it was a campaign to arrest all homeless people without any regard for their age or circumstances. The officer coldly asked him, "What are you doing here?" Kim replied, frightened, eating just that. But the officer immediately accused him of stealing food. Kim tried to explain, to defend himself, but no one was listening. And without any regard for his words, the officer handcuffed him and led him away violently, as if he wasn't dealing with a child, but with a danger that needed to be eliminated. At that moment, Kim wondered, would the police officer take him back home? Had his father reported him to the police? Or would they take him to a homeless shelter? He just wished the place would be warm and safe. But what happened next was not what he imagined. They put him in a truck full of homeless children like him, of various ages. All of them were scared, their faces reflecting confusion and bewilderment. It was clear that most of them had gone through the same harsh experience. When the police officer approached him, There was no clear reason for his arrest, not even a specific charge. He simply grabbed him and led him away violently. During his transfer, he overheard whispers among some people about their destination, and he heard a strange name repeated. Brother's home. He didn't know what this name meant. He thought it was a shelter, perhaps a warm place to sleep, a place that would surely be better than the harsh street life. But he was wrong. As were many around him, the place they were going to wasn't just a shelter. It was a real hell, disguised under a humanitarian name. Brother's home began in the 1960s, specifically in 1960 in South Korea, as an orphanage. And as we know, orphanages aren't necessarily ideal places. Many children who grew up in them don't describe it as the best experience of their lives. But let's not get sidetracked. While Brother's home was an orphanage in its early days, in 1975 it became part of a government campaign called street cleaning. Cleaning the streets of whom? Of beggars and the homeless. The government implemented this campaign for multiple reasons, including that these people, most of whom were marginalized, or suffering from mental disorders, or simply poor, were considered by the public to be a blemish on the public image. People saw them as visual pollution, as a problem to be gotten rid of. And it didn't stop there, as South Korea was then preparing to host the Olympic Games, and it was important in the eyes of the authorities for cities to appear clean and civilized. But what could happen when all these people are gathered in one place? What would they do with them? When Kim arrived at the gate of Brother's home, his heart was pounding fast. Inside him was a mixture of fear and hope. He was unloaded from the truck with others and stood before the massive iron gate. A faded gray gate, from which emanated the smell of rust mixed with the nearby sea air. He looked at it as if it were the dividing line between two worlds. Some of those who were with him were still confused. No one knew exactly what was happening. Would this place really be safe? Would it be a sanctuary? They had all gone through difficult experiences, and they were all clinging to any glimmer of hope. Then, the door creaked open slowly. With each passing moment, shivers crept into Kim's body. They entered the gate. The welcome was not reassuring. The guards and police who accompanied them treated them as if they were a herd, not humans. Inside, Kim glimpsed a group of children gathered in a courtyard watching them. Some looked with curiosity, others with empty eyes, devoid of any emotion. The walls were high, almost devoid of windows, and the building they were heading to looked more like a prison than a shelter. Despite everything, a small part of hope was still alive in their hearts. Perhaps this place was just a rehabilitation center. Perhaps it would be a new beginning. But they didn't know that this place would be the worst nightmare of their lives. They entered the main building. It was cold, dark, and gloomy. Nothing like a shelter at all. The walls were cracked, the floors were dirty, and the air was saturated with the smell of sweat and suffocating humidity, as if hundreds of people lived here, but without a sound from them. The silence was heavy, terrifying. Kim saw a few people silently cleaning the floors. They were wearing uniform blue clothing, closer to a full suit, more like workers' attire. And there were guards carrying wooden sticks, watching them closely. Kim and those with him were led to a small room crowded with dozens of children and men of different ages. The floor was hard and cold, and there weren't enough beds or blankets for everyone. And there were faint whispers, some carrying warnings. Kim heard one of the older inmates tell another in a low voice, "Don't talk too much. Don't cause trouble. If they hear you, they will punish you." They spent that first night with difficulty. The floor was cold, and anxiety dwelt deep within them. But with the sunrise, Kim awoke to the sound of a loud whistle piercing the dawn's stillness. one of the guards entered, distributing a blue uniform. The same uniform Kim had seen on those who were cleaning the floors. He told them in a sharp voice, "This is your uniform from today onwards. There is no other. You wear it always, until further notice." Then all of them were led out into the courtyard. Men, women, children, all ages. They stood in neat rows, more like victims than soldiers, and the numbering began. It wasn't clear if they were given actual numbers, but it seemed as if they were treated as numbers, not as people. Perhaps to facilitate control over them, or to strip them of their identity. Then a tall man emerged, wearing a gray suit and carrying a long stick. He stood before them and spoke in a stern tone. "You are here to work. Whoever does not obey orders will be punished. Whoever breaks the rules will be whipped." And indeed, the work began. Some of them were sent to the fields. Another part was forced to work in workshops within the facility's walls. Some of them were making sharp metal tools, like hooks, and others, using dangerous tools. A child who hadn't mastered holding a spoon 5 years ago was now given tools that could harm him and forced to use them for long hours without rest. The first days passed heavily, harsh enough to shatter any hope left in Kim's heart. The work was extremely exhausting for any human being, regardless of their age, but the hardest part wasn't the work itself. Rather, that error was forbidden, to be exhausted, to stumble, to fall from fatigue. That meant punishment. Many were punished simply for being slow in completing tasks, or dropping something, or making unintentional mistakes. The punishments were physical, whipping, beating, and humiliation. And the food. Little, cold, and often inedible. Some meals were spoiled, or even rotten, but they ate them nonetheless, because of hunger. It wasn't just about the quantity of food, but about the amount of work demanded from them for nothing. Every night, Kim would try to sleep, asking himself, "What did I do to deserve all this?" The place was more like a forced labor camp. You could never expect anyone to be treated with mercy, regardless of their age or gender, especially with such a large number of people present. The local authorities were aware of the existence of this institution, Brothers' Home, but they overlooked the violations, claiming that what was happening there was bold steps to combat homelessness. They would say, "Look at the result. There are no homeless people on the streets," but they completely ignored what was happening within the walls. Severe beatings, intense torture, with some inmates even losing consciousness from the severity of the beatings, and being forced to work for several consecutive days without food. And what's truly painful is that all these efforts and suffering, someone was benefiting from them. When someone entered Brothers' Home, they quickly realized that the danger didn't only come from the guards carrying sticks, but from some of the victims themselves. There was a strange and sick system. Some homeless individuals who had spent a long time in the place turned into what resembled leaders. Although they started as victims, they continued to replicate the guards' methods. One of the few survivors, who later spoke in an interview, recounted a terrifying story about one of these leaders. On his first night in Brothers' Home, he was forced to strip naked, and that leader poured a large amount of cold water on him. And he spent his night naked, shivering from the cold on the floor. But worse, this leader himself, who was supposed to be a victim like them, repeatedly assaulted him. He exploited his authority without anyone deterring him, because the guards overlooked his actions, as if to say, "At least he's doing our job." Many of the victims dreamed of escape, even if the idea was impossible. That simple hope was the only thing that gave them some strength to continue. But the reality was harsh. The place was surrounded by 7-meter-high walls, and all corners were monitored by armed guards and trained dogs. It was impossible to escape without being immediately caught. Some victims tried to organize a mass escape as a form of rebellion, but every plan they tried to implement was quickly discovered. And the reason was that some of the victims themselves were informing the guards. It might be difficult to blame them. In a harsh environment, full of constant beatings and humiliation, some might feel that attempting rebellion could lead to even harsher torture, so they sought to avoid it by any means, even at the expense of their comrades. And some spoke of the torture chamber. No one knows exactly what happened there, but if the entire place was considered a torture chamber, what could you expect from a place called the torture chamber? Perhaps much worse things. There are no precise testimonies about what happened there, but some figures, although unconfirmed, indicate that a large number of people lost their lives inside that hell. We can talk about what might happen among victims who tried to escape or thought about it a long time ago. Prison itself is not just the walls that surround them, or the guards and dogs, but it is also a psychological prison. Even if the doors were opened for them, they know that getting caught is a matter of time, and that they will be captured if they try to escape. Therefore, you can expect that a large number of prisoners, over the years, completely abandoned the idea of escape from their minds even if life there was terrible. At least, they know they won't be whipped or punished further. And so, no one wants to escape. Now, how did it end? How was the secret of those who ran Brothers home exposed? The answer came in 1986. When a man walking in the forest saw strange activity, people being beaten, surrounded by dogs and guards. When he got closer and looked more, he discovered that the place was a camp. And somehow, it seemed that these people he saw were prisoners. This man, who was originally a prosecutor, became curious and investigated further. He discovered the truth about this place, and also discovered that the person running the camp, named Park, was hiding about $20 million in cash as a result of the forced labor of the homeless. This man also knew that he would not be held accountable, especially since he was responsible for the street vaccination campaign against the homeless, the campaign that paved the way for him to control this camp. After this matter was exposed, there was a major attempt to cover it up, as they did not want the issue to be revealed. But after the scandal, all those who managed to survive the torture were released. However, a large percentage of them were orphans, unable to communicate with their families, especially given the limited means of communication in the 1980s. Also, the South Korean government tried to cover up the matter as much as possible, because they were the ones who started this project, and appointed Park as its head in the end. Park was imprisoned, but the charge was not what people expected. He was only imprisoned for embezzlement, and spent 2.5 years in prison, then was released, without any of the victims receiving compensation or even an official apology. But the story didn't end here. Many survivors entered psychiatric and regular hospitals for treatment of the traumas they suffered. In 2012, the first survivor, named Han, appeared before the media and began protesting in front of the court for more than 900 days, demanding official recognition of what happened and a legal solution to these atrocities. And finally, in 2020, they agreed to open a new investigation. But even now, the victims have not been granted any compensation. The sad ending to this video is that the camp operated for 12 years, and more than 3,400 people suffered the atrocities of this camp. It is said that the authorities hid or burned most of the files related to the events, and it is believed that about 500 of these victims died. This topic angered me for a long time, from the beginning of my preparation for this video, because of the horrific details and the many assaults that occurred. Even the women's section was subjected to repeated violations, and victims were injected with substances to prevent them from becoming pregnant after conception. And as I mentioned, not all victims were homeless. But even if they were, that doesn't justify what happened to them. Imagine the horror a person feels when they are on the street at the wrong time and are punished in this way. And I imagine If this corruption was this extensive, then perhaps the police themselves were involved. And perhaps they offered incentives to those who succeeded in arresting a certain number of homeless people, such as giving them a certain amount for every 50 homeless people arrested. Most people participated in this matter for money, and you can imagine they didn't care much whether the person in front of them was homeless or not. There was no oversight or regulation, and that in itself is extremely dangerous. While researching and preparing this video, I noticed something strange and darkly ironic. Many began to liken this story to the series Squid Game, even describing it as the real-life version of the series. In Squid Game, the participants knew they entered a competition to win, even if they weren't fully aware of the rules or didn't know they would die if they lost. But at least they had a clear goal to win, end their suffering, or get a new chance at life. The story there was barbaric, yes, but it doesn't compare to what happened in reality. The reality was far worse. Imagine walking down the street and suddenly being kidnapped into a car. This is even worse than the series fiction. Many of those who were there felt deep shame about what happened, and that's why they were hesitant to speak or appear in public. Therefore, the information available about the case online is very limited. I tried to gather as many real details and victim testimonies as possible to tell the story from one of their perspectives. I'm sure I might have made some mistakes in the details, but I feel that the reality was much harsher than what is recounted. So, the next time you watch Squid Game or any similar work, remember that there are people in this world who have lived stories far worse than fiction. As for the survivors of Brothers Home, I deeply hope they find justice someday.